Hi and welcome to another story, and today we have part 6 of The Person Controller by David Baddiel, continuing from chapter 34, Two Cowboys About to Draw. Moments later, Eric was whirling around and around in the sink with the tap water coming off him on all sides. It was like a beautiful fountain, if a beautiful fountain had had at its centre not a dolphin or a Greek god, but a whirling fat man. "Janine!" he shouted as he went round. "Oh no," she shouted back. "I'm not coming to you again. I'm fed up with you shouting at me to rescue every time you get into the tiniest situation. Besides, I'm trying to make the TV work in here." "But I'm not in control of my own body," shouted Eric. "Tell me about it," muttered Janine. Then more loudly, "That's why I bought you the fat tanks. Not that you ever wear it." And she pressed some more buttons, at which point Eric spun out of the sink and across the room. "Whoa, help!" he screamed, but not loud enough to wake up Margaret Scratcher, who was sleeping on the floor next to the window, where he was heading. Splat! Eric's tummy landed with all its considerable wobbliness on top of Margaret Scratcher, who at that point looked more like Margaret Squished her. But she was okay. Eric knew this because after the initial moment of squishing, he heard meow. "What's wrong with Margaret?" shouted Janine. "Nothing, darling," shouted Eric back, deciding in this case that it might be better to stay on top of the cat. "Meow," said Margaret. Everything for a moment was quiet. Eric breathed a sigh of relief, but then his stomach started moving, without him doing anything. This wasn't anything to do with the controller, though, which Janine was shaking at this point to see if it contained any batteries. This was to do with Margaret. You know when a cat gets a mouse or a bird and they lie on their back and drum the mouse or bird frantically with their back legs as a form of play torture? This was what Margaret decided to do to Eric's tummy. At first, from Eric's point of view, it was a kind of pleasant sensation. It was like having a massage. Eric felt the waves of flesh vibrate and wondered for a moment if he should lie face down on the cat more often, as a way of perhaps reducing his waistline. Then Margaret extended her claws. "Ow! Ow! Ow! Ow!" said Eric, frantically jumping up, with Margaret attached to him. "Oh, what is going on in there? And how do you make the TV work with this thing?" cried Janine, flicking the control stick on the controller backwards and forwards. Eric, with Margaret stuck to his tummy like a very furry brooch, jumped up and down 6 or 7 times in very quick succession. He jumped very high. In fact, he hit the ceiling every time, making quite a big dent in it. Margaret looked on, a bit confused as to the exact point of all this. She leapt off Eric, landing and turning round to look at him quizzically. Janine in the playroom just shook her head and randomly pressed as many buttons as she could. Eric, his hair covered in plaster, adopted a martial arts pose, one knee bent forward and both hands out, karate style. Margaret Scratcher, sensing trouble, arched her back and ruffled up her fur. It was like 2 cowboys poised to draw, or 2 old aristocrats about to have a duel, or a fat man and a cat facing each other, uncertain about how they ended up like this. In the playroom, Janine pressed the gold button. "Hey!" said Eric, leaping up and kicking out and doing a hand shuffle at the same time. Margaret Scratcher said, "Meow," and started licking herself. "Yeah, yeah, yeah," said Eric, karate chopping and high kicking in a circle around the cat. "Why are you making so much noise?" said Janine, finally coming through from the playroom, but with her head down and still fiddling with the controller. "Hi-ya! Or me-ya!" said Eric, whirling around towards her. I don't know why I'm saying these things." "Oh, don't be stupid," she replied, but still without looking at him, and moving the control stick around in a circle and pressing repeatedly on the gold button. "Hi!" Eric sprang up into a horizontal, flying position, fist forward, like Superman in flight. He actually hung there in the air, like that for a couple of moments, the way cartoon figures do when they run off a cliff. And then, with a big "yeah!" he flew forward towards her, karate chopping the controller out of her hands and sending it whirling across the room. "Eric," said Janine, looking up at long last. "Sorry," said Eric, collapsing in a heap by her feet. "Dad," said Ellie, who had come back into the kitchen. "Mum," said Fred, who had also come back into the kitchen. "What are you doing?" they said together. They didn't actually wait for an answer, though. Their eyes just followed the controller as it wheeled in the air towards the window. Outside they could see Derek White reversing out of his drive. In a second it became clear what was going to happen. The controller was going to fly through the window, breaking its glass. But that wasn't, at the speed it was moving, going to be enough to stop it crashing down the stone's front drive and ending up in the road at just the moment that Derek was going to pull out of his front drive, crushing it beneath the wheels of his large people carrier. Everyone could see this was going to happen. In fact, Ellie even said really fast, "Fred, it's going to fly through the window and then crash down our front drive and end up in the road at just the moment that Derek is going to pull out of his front drive, crushing it beneath the wheels of his large people carrier." "I know, Ellie. What are we going to do? What are we going to—" "Oh, it's hit the wall and dropped to the floor." "Oh," said Fred. "Right." Chapter 35. The Boxpital. "Oh no," said Ellie, once she and Fred had moved the controller to the safety of the playroom again. Fred had stuck a post-it note on the back with the words "Mum, Dad, do not touch" underlined on it. While agreeing this was a good idea, Ellie pointed out that it never worked when they did that, as they often did with special food meant only for them in the fridge. "It's flashing faster now." "So's the bracelet," said Fred, which had finally come off Eric's wrist as a result of the whole family forming a kind of conga, with Ellie at the front, then Fred, then Janine, and pulling at it. When it actually came off with an enormous pop, Eric had fallen over on his back, and so had the conga in opposite directions. There had been a small amount of uncertainty about what overall just happened. Eric had insisted that he had no idea why he'd been whirling about in the sink or doing karate moves around the cat, but Janine had quickly lost interest in her husband's whittering and turned the TV on, and soon after that Eric had lost interest in trying to make her listen and said, "Have we got any snacks in?" "Mum and Dad must have used up loads of power," Fred continued. "OK," said Ellie. "Yes. But it's the final next Saturday." "Yes, well, we have to conserve power. No using the controller again until the match, for anything." A few months before all this happened, Margaret Scratcher had brought in a sparrow. When Eric had finally managed to get it away from the cat's clutches, which had involved him doing a lot of running around and stopping every so often to breathe extremely heavily, and a certain amount of Margaret looking like, "What? I've brought you a present. What's wrong with you people?" The poor terrified bird had sustained a damaged wing and couldn't fly any more. So Fred and Ellie had made it a kind of bed in a shoebox lined with red crepe paper. Every day they fed the sparrow water using a pipette. Amazingly, it worked. The sparrow lived to fly another day, slightly wonkily. They called this shoebox the Boxpital, and it was into the Boxpital that the controller and bracelet went, lights flashing. It seemed faster than ever. Ellie placed them in solemnly, as if they were sacred relics, or maybe like they were living things, the same as the sparrow. For a while, they didn't know what to do, since they were in the playroom anyway. Ellie suggested that they play a video game, just to pass the slowly unfolding time. But try as they might, they couldn't find their old controllers. Both Fred's and Ellie's had been lost somewhere, lost and forgotten, all because of the controller. Chapter 36. Happy Christmas Stones. The following week was torture for Fred and Ellie. They couldn't play video games, but they still had to keep going into the playroom to check that the controller hadn't stopped flashing. Fred began measuring the flashing, thinking that would help in some way. He tried to time it using a stopwatch, and at another point against his own heartbeat, which he noticed seemed to beat louder when he looked at the controller. Ellie ended up just staring out of her bedroom window. It was, she noticed, getting darker earlier and earlier as the year began moving towards its end. That should, she thought, make the days go more quickly, which, because she and Fred felt stuck at that particular moment, should have been a good thing. But it wasn't. It just made her feel like time was running out. Eventually, after what seemed more like a year than a week, Saturday came. "Let me just check again," said Fred, as they arrived through the gates of Bracket Wood. Ellie sighed. She was carrying the Boxpital. "This is the last time. What if exposing it to light makes it lose power? Oh, I hadn't thought of that." Ellie made a "well, it's always me who has to do the thinking, isn't it?" face. But she opened up the Boxpital anyway. Inside, the lights were flickering fast. "Do you think it'll be okay for the match later?" said Fred. "It'll be fine," said Ellie, shutting the box. "We're nearly there now, just as long as we don't use it up on anything." "Well, well, well." Ellie and Fred looked up. "Really?" said Ellie. "Oh, yes," said Isla. Her arms were folded, and she had a smirk on her face that Ellie didn't like one bit, as if she knew something. "I don't think a rematch is worth your while, Isla," said Ellie. "It was very embarrassing for you and your brother last time." "Oh, was it?" said Isla. "Yes, she's right. It was," said Morris, whose arms were also folded. "Shut up," said Isla. "Just saying," said Morris, "especially the juggling part." "I don't think it'll be that embarrassing for us this time, though, will it, Morris?" Morris slowly shook his head. Fred and Ellie frowned. They weren't sure if he was doing it on that slowly to increase the drama or just because he was generally slow in the head. "Why not?" said Fred. Isla's smirk grew wider until it grew into a smile, but not a good smile. She nodded at Morris as if ordering him to do something, which he did. He unfolded his arms to reveal on his right wrist a black bracelet. "Happy Christmas, Stones," said Isla. Chapter 37. Charged to the max. Fred and Ellie's mouths dropped open. Still with their mouths gaping, it was like two goldfish doing a dance routine. They turned their heads to look at Isla, who unfolded her arms to reveal in her hands the controller. Well, not the controller, not Fred and Ellie's controller, but one exactly like it. "Where did you get that?" said Ellie. Isla's not good smile grew wider still. It was getting quite close to being a mad grin. "I knew something was going on with that controller you kept playing with, so I had a chat with some friends of yours. They are your friends, aren't they? Those two ultra nerds in years 2 and 3? What are their names again, Morris?" One of them, the girl is called a colour, Red, and the boy's name is something, Welsh, I think, Red and Tom Jones?" We're sorry, said Scarlett and Sterling, appearing from around the corner. They may have been listening in. "We didn't want to tell them, honest," said Scarlett. "No, we didn't, but she said Morris would stamp on our iPods." "You don't have iPods," cried Fred. "No, but we will in year 5. "Morris will have left the school by then," said Ellie. There was a short pause. "Oh," said Scarlett. We didn't think of that." "No," said Sterling. "Or the fact that by then almost definitely we won't be using iPods. I imagine we'll be using the Zen Flash Player or the TDK Screen Circus, both already in beta development, and ow!" The ow was because Morris had flicked him on the eyebrow. "And also," said Scarlett, "you didn't want us to come with you to school when we offered to on Face the other day." "Yes," said Sterling. "Sometimes I'm not sure you like us at all." Scarlett, seeing her brother starting to sniff, began to sniff more. Ellie and Fred looked at each other. "Scarlett, Sterling," said Ellie, "of course we like you. Don't cry. It's okay. Well, it's a beautiful scene, I must say, but run along now. What do you call these two again? Stones?" "Eye babies," the eye babies said, bursting into tears. "Yes, run along, eye babies." And they did, as fast as they could go. Fred and Ellie looked on unhappily. Nothing felt good about this. "How sweet," said Isla, smirking. "Anyway, following the information garnered from your very close friends, we paid a visit to—" Here she looked over Ellie and Fred's shoulders towards something behind them. "The computer room." Fred and Ellie turned around. In the distance, in the main school building, they could see a window. On the inside of the room, facing the window, was a small screen. On the small screen, they could see a man waving with both arms. "This morning, in fact," said Isla, "and he was on the screen." "The mystery man," said Fred. "Yes," said Isla. "Furious with you he was. Something about shutting the computer down." Fred and Ellie looked a bit ashamed. Isla made an uh-oh face, followed by a sarcastic sticking out her bottom lip. "What a shame face." "Anyway, we promised him, didn't we, Morris, that we would shut the computer down if he got us a controller like yours." Fred and Ellie looked at each other. Ellie frowned. "This morning? How did it get here so quickly?" "I don't know. How long did yours take to arrive?" "But didn't you have to come home to get it?" said Fred. "We are home, dumb twin," said Isla. "Our dad's the head. We live here." Ellie turned around again. The figure on the screen had stopped waving his arms and just looked sad. "But you didn't shut the computer down," she said, turning back. Isla made a whatever face and said, "Whatever. Anyway," and here she raised her controller up to face the twins. "Let's get on with it." Ellie took a deep breath. "Listen, Isla, Fred's desperate to play in the game, and the school is desperate to win. We haven't won for 10 years, and our controller is running out of power. Can't we just be friends?" Isla shook her head. "Okay, thought not. Well, can't we just not do this, or do it next week after the game?" Isla's grin went through the roof. For a second she looked like the Joker from Batman, if the Joker from Batman had been somewhat precocious and an annoying 11-year-old girl. "Sorry, I didn't hear most of what you said. The only words I heard, in fact, were our controller is running out of power. Which is interesting from our point of view because, as you know, ours has just arrived. And is..." She turned it around and Morris held up his bracelet. The blue light on both were pulsing slowly, perfectly in time, bright and clear. "Charged to the max." Fred and Ellie exchanged glances. There was clearly no point in trying to reason with her. "Okay," said Ellie, opening the box pitot with a heavy heart. Chapter 38. EMWMWTAAPT. Morris. A minute later, they lined up. Morris and Fred faced each other, with Isla behind Morris and Ellie behind Fred, controllers at the ready. "Okay," said Ellie. "Press your buttons on the count of 3. 1, 2... Oh, pooter that, said Isla, pressing the silver and gold buttons on her controller together and flicking her control stick sharply forward. Morris immediately jumped up. Fred expected him to arc towards him, and either feet or arms flying, but instead Morris swirled in the air, round and round, and as he swirled his body took on armour, a face mask with a metal grill, a bronze chest shield, and what happened to be a long black skirt. The long black skirt made Fred laugh for a moment, but that when Morris landed in front of him and acquired, as the last bit of his outfit, a body-length bamboo stick, it didn't look funny anymore. It looked... Kendo! Fred shouted to Ellie behind him. She's made him a kendo warrior. I know. Can you kendo me up? Ellie was frantically pressing the buttons on their controller. No, it hasn't got enough power, and I don't know how to do that. You'll have to... There wasn't time to tell him what to do, as Morris was circling towards Fred with his bamboo stick, whirling. Ellie instinctively put her fingers on the controller and Fred immediately began dodging. Every time Morris brought the shinai down, Fred would leap out of the way just in time. Whack, whoosh, went the air around them. Isla frowned and twisted her control stick angrily. Morris turned to face Fred, raising his shinai high above his head. Ellie's thumbs moved fast. Fred ducked and kicked his leg out, bringing his opponent crashing down. Fred then jumped up with a big "Hi-yah!" intending to land hard on Morris's head, but Isla's fingers were quick too, and Fred's flight downwards was stopped, nastily, by Morris's black-gloved fist coming up and batting him away to the side. For whack! Fred flew across the back playground. Oof, said Fred as he bounced off the school climbing frame. Getting up gingerly, Fred couldn't see Kendo Warrior Morris any more. Perhaps they've given up, he thought optimistically. Or perhaps he thought less optimistically. The reason I can't see Kendo Warrior Morris is that coming at me instead is enormous muscly wrestler man with tattoos and a ponytail, Morris. What's going on? He shouted back at Ellie, who was running towards him, waving the controller. She's activated a different character, shouted Ellie. Can she do that? Don't we have to start a new match? Shut up and fight! Ellie saw the speed at which enormous muscly wrestler man with tattoos and a ponytail Morris was approaching, each both fists forward, or maybe... She pressed the amber button and jerked the control stick. Just in time, Fred leapt up and EMWMWTAAPT Morris powered past underneath him. That's enormous muscly wrestler man with tattoos and a ponytail Morris. Now, one thing about being controlled by the controller was that although it meant you could do all sorts of things that you couldn't normally, in terms of jumping and fighting, and even looking amazing, you were at some level still you, which meant that Morris was, even as a kendo warrior, Morris, or EMWMWTAAPT, Morris, still Morris, and therefore quite stupid. Which might be why he carried on running without realising what had happened for 10 seconds after Fred had jumped up, and why he ended up crashing both fists forward into the climbing frame, and getting his enormous arms stuck between 4 square rungs. Ah, said Morris in a low, growly voice, like you might expect an enormous muscly wrestler man with tattoos and a ponytail to have. He tried to move his arms, you could see the veins bulging in his biceps, and said, "Ah!" a few more times, but it was no good. Enormous muscly wrestler man with tattoos and a ponytail Morris was stuck in a primary school playground climbing frame. Ellie came over to Fred, who was crouching nearby, having landed safely from his big leap. Well done, she said. Well done yourself, he said. Is there any power left in the controller? Ellie looked at the light. A small amount, I think. Come on, let's get to the game. Hold on just one tiny minute, said a voice behind them. Isla's, of course. Unlike you two, the boy in our twinship, although the more stupid one, obviously, isn't worse at video games. In fact, he may even be as good at them as his sister. Thanks, Isla, growled Morris, his back still turned away from them and stuck in the climbing frame position. No problem, Morris, said Isla. She leant through the rungs of the climbing frame and took the bracelet off Morris's wrist, while handing him her controller. His hands, although his arms were stuck, could still move. He put his fingers on the buttons. Isla turned back to Ellie and Fred and slowly, really making a lot of the moment, slid the bracelet down her wrist. Oh, Isla. No, said Ellie. Isla looked at her coolly. You're not the only one who enjoys changing how she looks, Ellie, she said. Morris! Morris's hands moved, pressing the buttons, and Isla changed. And that is where we will leave part 6 of The Person Controller by David Baddiel. I'll be back soon with the next part of this fantastic story, and lots more stories and videos coming your way very soon. If you'd like to subscribe or hit a like, that's always appreciated. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.